Well, I teased it this way yesterday. It's a day that could change everything. NFL trade deadline day, of course. Where are the Colts going to be from a mentality standpoint? Are they buyers? Would they, dare I say, be sellers? Will they just stand pat and continue to work with the average operation that they have going right now with still so many issues at a number of positions that would help get them in a better spot to be the contender that they claim to be? And that could extend a lot of different ways, whether you're saying it's a contender for a Super Bowl that I think is far-fetched or a playoff spot that is certainly obtainable given the muck that is around that section of the AFC and the Colts' favorable schedule moving forward. But in all seriousness, it is Election Day. Hope you're able to get out, vote, do everything you wanted to do. That'll be the extent of that conversation today. Like to use this as an escapism, a place to focus on the sports world and get away from the rest of that. And for the Colts, regrettably, I know that's not the happiest place to escape to because of where they're at and the fact that Shane Steichen is now appearing on betting markets for a coach to potentially be let go this season. He's middle of that market. I'm not saying that means anything, but that is how crazy this conversation has shifted in the last week from the decision to bench Anthony Richardson for Joe Flacco, the colossal failings that the offense had for the matchup against Minnesota on Sunday night, to now the idea that, well, could they go back? Could they reverse course? Could they wind up getting to a place where Anthony Richardson's development is back to being the number one priority for them? Either way, though, if this is a team that is legitimate in their interest to make the postseason, and I do believe there are members of that locker room, whether they're veterans, whether it's Shane Steichen and his staff, heck, even Anthony Richardson, if he was back under center, that would like to make the postseason, that would like to get there and have the opportunity to make some noise, even though I'm very pessimistic about the noise they could make. That goal is still there for them, and they still have every opportunity to achieve that. If that is your mindset, you should be buyers before the 4 p.m. deadline today. Cornerback is still a massive need for this team. Yes, Juju Brents is coming back in a season from now, right? Once he's back next year. Kenny Moore is still a stud for this Colts defense. And yes, there's been strides made from this Colts secondary that was largely, poked fun at for most of the last year, but it hasn't been to the stages that Chris Ballard thought it was going to go to. Like, Jalen Jones has had his moments, but this is still not a secondary that is going to intimidate anybody come meaningful football in January if they're playing there. I don't know if Marshawn Lattimore is somebody that the Colts would even have interest in, but he is a name at a position of need for the Colts that is being thrown around as a piece the Saints want to move on from. If you're able to find, and this is not my job to necessarily find this, much as the Colts, if you're able to find a receiver or a tight end of some kind that is on an expiring deal or is in a situation where you're not hung up on that type of cost to your books for multiple years, maybe that's somebody you go out and go after. But standing pat, for me, even in a league that does not exude the earth-shattering trades that we've grown accustomed to seeing at MLB's trade deadline or the NBA trade deadline, just because that is the undercurrent of NFL trade deadline day, does not make for a sufficient excuse for me for the Colts to say, yeah, we're good. We don't need anything. We're fine. 6 points offensively against the Vikings with Joe Flacco, our win-now mode quarterback, is all good. It'll figure itself out. That's not good enough for me. Shouldn't be good enough for Colts fans. And yes, you're not going to see like a blockbuster trade that involves them going and landing Devontae Smith or, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm just throwing out big-name wide receivers. Obviously, the Lions are not moving on from him, but you get my point. That type of move isn't going to happen right now. You rarely see that type of move happen. but I'm talking about adding a couple pieces either from a depth standpoint or from a reliability standpoint to plug up holes if you're serious about this postseason push. And I get it, it's a tight spot for Indianapolis because those playoff hopes could basically be put to rest if they lose the next three. Like if they fall to Buffalo and then New York and then Detroit, unless the AFC is going to continue on this trend of, hey, look at the 2-7 club, come on down. Unless that's continuing, you need to stay afloat and tread water against these next couple games. And I think they could beat the Jets. Like, the Jets don't do anything to instill fear in me. They're still figuring things out. I think that's a gettable game. Buffalo defensively is certainly a step back from tenacity as to what you felt against Minnesota. Like, everybody's talking about the Bills and their mark of whatever, 6-2 or 7-2, wherever it is now, and parading it around like the Bills are a front runner to hoist the Lombardi Trophy this year. And I don't trust that Buffalo defense. The offense with Josh Allen is high level, but like they just gave up 27 to Miami, who is still figuring things out with Tua seemingly one hit away from his football career being over. So I'm not necessarily worried about a Joe Flacco-led offense or an Anthony Richardson-led offense, for that matter, against the Bills. I am worried about Josh Allen. I'm worried about Josh Allen and Keon Coleman and Amari Cooper potentially running circles around the Colts secondary. That is a serious concern for me, and it's something that we're going to get into as the week rolls on when we get ready for that matchup against Buffalo. But for them just to look at this roster and say there's not a need for improvement, the reason it doesn't cut it for me is I think the Colts rush this decision with Flacco and Richardson, or they're protecting face, they're saving face, and Richardson really does have work ethic issues, / they held him accountable for the tap-out moment, but they're spinning it as they're in win-now mode now. And the reason I say they're spinning it is because they didn't do anything this offseason of aggressive nature to say, we're in win-now mode right now. It was clear at every corner this was going to be a learning year for Anthony Richardson, while, like every other organization in the National Football League, they're going to try to win games, except for maybe the Panthers, because that's just what they do. I don't think we have a bunch of Carolina listeners right now. I think I'm safe on that line. So to revamp their win-now mode efforts to make up for what you didn't do in the offseason, if this is legitimate, what they're selling you, there should be some type of move made between now and today's deadline. The rumor mill has been swirling around if they could go the seller's route. The most notable non-quarterback name on their list would be DeForest Buckner. And Diana Rossini had reported of The Athletic, it's either yesterday or Saturday, I can't remember which, but it basically reported that the Colts had gotten some calls about DeForest Buckner, but they weren't interested in moving him, which makes sense because he's one of the best game records in the National Football League right now. And if you were telling yourself you're in win-now mode, you were certainly not getting rid of him. But the other name is Anthony Richardson. And I've gotten that question, whether it's from friends that are Colts fans, people on Twitter, people texting me, whatever the case may be, of would they jettison Anthony Richardson today? Would they rip the Band-Aid off, admit failure with the draft selection, and say they're moving on to new things? The answer is no for a number of reasons. The first one being Chris Ballard's not losing his job today. I can sit here like I've done for the last couple of years and think that his stay in Indianapolis is too long, that to achieve as little as he has over that span and still have as much job security as it would appear he has speaks to the areas of concern most have for the Colts as they're currently run. But it's not happening today. And the only way you would admit fault on Anthony Richardson and deal him somewhere else, there's two reasons that would happen. The first would be somebody offers you a king's ransom for a quarterback that has played 10 games, who is completing about 44% of his passes. Now, people poke fun at some of us in the media and say, oh, well, that's why you're not a general manager. Well, it doesn't take somebody with experience in a front office to know that people aren't going to give up a king's ransom for someone that's completing 44% of their passes. That was a raw project to begin with, that's only played 10 games, that might be damaged goods right now because the organization decided to pull the rug out from underneath him. Generally, king's ransoms don't go that way. Now, Jerry Jones says the Cowboys are buyers, so who knows? I mean, everything might be up in the air at that point, despite the fact that Dak Prescott's put on IR today and the Cowboys are going nowhere. But crazy owners do crazy things. Call up the Raiders. Why not? They're always down to do something dysfunctional. Maybe the Raiders would overpay for Anthony Richardson. But that's the first case, is that the Colts would need something to balance their books, balance their pockets, give them something comfortable to lay on to move on from a quarterback that they still claim to believe in. So that's number one of why it's unlikely for anything to happen in that regard for Anthony Richardson. The other one is they're not getting rid of Chris Ballard today. And the only way you publicly acknowledge the fact that maybe you were wrong on the quarterback, which again, I've not said that. I'm not fully out on Anthony Richardson as an NFL quarterback just yet. Some people want to say I've lost the plot in that regard, that the completion numbers are garbage and that he's not getting better week to week. I would fight that to some extent. There's been moments when you go back, look at the All-22, look at what he's seeing, look at just full game recaps or rewatch a couple plays, a couple drives for the Colts. It's not all on him. And there have been strides. The game against the Texans, drop city was the theme of that game. If there is help from his complementary pieces, you're looking at a different conversation about how you feel about the quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts' growth. We talked about it at the time. It's hard to remember that when the lasting image that you have of him from that day is tapping out and coming out of the game, because that overshadows everything else that happened prior to that point for most people. I'm not most people in that regard. I've acknowledged the fact it's insane. It can't happen for that position because it's never happened for that position since I've been alive. I can't recall a quarterback tapping out of a game and then publicly saying, I'm tired, I need to go. We talked about that last week, but the point remains the same. You lose the idea of what he looked like against the Texans because people can't get over the fact that he tapped out and quit. But it would require a public admission by Chris Ballard and the Colts that they were wrong on him for him to get traded. Because they're done with the project. They said, quote, don't call him Superman. It's going to take time. There's going to be ups and downs. They said all of these things when he was drafted and going into this season. And they pulled the plug and abandoned ship on him, at least for the time being, because Shane Steichen likes to talk in the worst kind of coach speak. Like, we don't have the elixir today because Jake pays most of the bills around here, so I can't run Shane Steichen's formula through our elixir to translate the coach speak. But the worst kind of coach speak for me is the kind that ends vague. For example, when he's asked 2-3 weeks in a row now by James Boyd of The Athletic, is insert quarterback name here your starter? And his answer is yes for now, or yes for the time being. What are we doing there? He either is or he isn't. And I can sit here and tell you I believe Anthony Richardson can be an NFL quarterback all I want. At this stage of his career, there's no chess match where Sean McDermott is sitting back in Buffalo scared out of his wits, losing sleep because he has to prepare for either Joe Flacco or Anthony Richardson. That's not a sleep crisis moment for him. So it's not gamesmanship in my mind if that is what's happening there. But he's been so vague that you can't get a read on it anymore. And maybe that's half the battle from a consumption standpoint, from a media consumption standpoint, from a fan engagement standpoint, but you can't get a read on how they directly feel about Richardson or about Joe Flacco. What's going to make me sick to my stomach, though, is if they roll Joe Flacco out these next 3 games. And for those that are unaware, or maybe your way of coping with the Colts' struggles this year is just to take it one game at a time, and you're not looking ahead at the schedule. At home against the Bills on Sunday. At home against the Jets, which was going to be a primetime game, but got flexed out yesterday, in case you missed that. That's now a 1 o'clock game. On the road against the Jets, just to clarify, on the 17th. 3 weeks from now, you're at home against the Lions. And then there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I haven't run all the simulations because I, too, am taking it to some extent 1 or 2 games at a time. And especially these next 3 because the season could be turned upside down depending on how things go for the Colts over this stretch. But if they trot Joe Flacco out there for these next 3 games and their playoff position is worsened further to the point that you're looking at like a 5% chance and they need to run the table on the Patriots, they should win that game, regardless of who's quarterback. The Broncos, Denver has a good defense. They haven't played a ton of high-level opponents in their wins. The Ravens rung them up this past weekend. That's a very good football team in Baltimore, as you know. So it's hard to get a full read on Denver. That said, they'll probably play my Chiefs pretty close. It'll be 1-possession game, and I'll get more gray hair out of it this weekend. But on the road at Mile High, that's a coin flip for me. At home against Tennessee, Colts should be able to get that. On the road against the Giants, Colts should be able to get that. At home against the Jaguars, it depends which version of Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr. you get, but I would still label that as a gettable game for the Colts. So yeah, they could feasibly go 4-1 over their last 5 games and then see where the dust settles from there. But if they're purportedly in win now mode right now, and they go 0-3 or 1-2 over these next 3 games against the Bills, the Jets, and the Lions, and they turn the car back over to Anthony Richardson, that's going to make me sick to my stomach. Because if he's going to be the franchise quarterback for this team moving forward, if you still believe in him, you can't have a narrative floating around about your franchise quarterback that when the schedule gets tough, oh boy, got to pull him back in. It's the backup's turn to go out there and play. You don't see the Bills saying that about Josh Allen. The Ravens saying that about Lamar Jackson. Heck, even as bad as Aaron Rodgers has played at times this year, you don't see the Jets saying that about him. The Bengals certainly don't say it about Joe Burrow. That can't be a conversation that's over Anthony Richardson's head, regardless of what happens the rest of this year. Because that's optically what it screams. Unless you're going to publicly say, which they won't, that this is a disciplinary move for the tap out. And because they're not saying that, I'm going to operate with what's being told by the Colts, which is they are suddenly in win now mode and building off the highly produced momentum they have from the 6 points they put up against the Vikings offensively. Anthony Richardson can't be coddled and babied. Jake said that before he left, and it's as true now as it was then. If this is not disciplinary action that's happening in front of our eyes, but it is a lack of faith for him to be ready to play the quarterback position that you told everybody he was ready to play in July. Both Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard on the record saying that. If that is the case, I don't want to see Anthony Richardson again this year. That would be the truthful action based on the statement you made, that he's not ready and Joe Flacco gives you the best chance to win. If it's Richardson back after this tough stretch, either you did not trust him against better competition, which is great for anybody's confidence, or this was an extended disciplinary thing that we didn't see coming, or not didn't see coming, rather, that they didn't publicly acknowledge that it was. That they tried to play off like it had nothing to do with it, even though anybody that has ever been in a locker room, former players, coaches, whatever, are saying nationally that there's no way something like that could not have an impact on the direction of the franchise and on a coaching staff. I suppose the third option would be if playoff contention is totally off the board, then maybe they are shifting towards Anthony Richardson again because there's nothing left to play for, which again goes back to the idea that confidence could be at a premium for your franchise quarterback. The Colts have the ability to put all this back to bed. They could start winning games, which again, to go 1-2 against the Bills, the Jets, and the Lions would be a massive achievement with where this group is right now, assuming they stand pat and don't do anything at the deadline today. But if you give him control back of this team when the season's already lost, what kind of message are you saying to him? That you needed to pump up the veterans on this team and save face a little bit there by saying, no, guys, now we're going to play to win. But now that we can't win anymore, here's the keys back to Anthony Richardson. I don't think you're going to achieve the message you wanted to by doing that. But if we're taking Shane Steichen as his word, it's Joe Flacco's team right now. And one would assume that continues Sunday against the Bills. And that is legitimately where the Colts season currently sits. Even if they might upset me and put Anthony Richardson back out there when the schedule gets softer, that decision might be made for them if they stumble and go 0-3 over the next 3 games. The chance to rewrite this season takes a dip after the deadline today and then reaches its apex over these final 3 games against Buffalo, against the Jets, and against the Lions. We have a loaded show for you today on a Tuesday, going backwards in this regard. Scott Agnes is going to join us top of the 2 o'clock hour, take us through a monster Pacers win last night, including another revenge game, if you will, for Rick Carlisle, a return home for Miles Turner, great performance from them. Paul Cassaro, head coach of the IU Indy Jaguars, they get a win in their own right in dominant fashion to start the college basketball season in their rebranded era and in his first year at the helm. That at the bottom of the 1 o'clock hour. Top of the 1 o'clock hour, Stephen Holder will join us, take us through everything I just went on about the Colts. And then, when we return, very excited about this conversation, Stephanie White returns home, the new head coach of the Indiana Fever. We'll get her thoughts on what went into this return and the upside with Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark at the helm. It's Query & Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. has a rich history with the state of Indiana. Grew up in West Lebanon, a Miss Indiana basketball winner, national title winner with Purdue. Longtime relationships both as a player and as a coach with the Indiana Fever, and of course a decorated coach in her own right. Returns home, made official last week, and now made official yesterday with introductory press conferences. It's head coach of the Indiana Fever, Stephanie White, making some time for us. Stephanie, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for making the time for us. I know you've gotten a lot of this, no doubt, but welcome home. Glad to have you back in the Hoosier State. I know that this has been asked in a couple different ways, but when you initially depart from the Fever back in 2015 or 2016 and take the Vanderbilt job, did you ever envision that you might make it back here someday? Stephanie, we still got you?
Oh, no, I'm here.
Sorry, I think we lost you for just a second there. When you took the Vanderbilt job, did you ever think that you might return to Indiana someday?
I really never did. I thought I certainly had hoped at some point that my career would bring me back to Indiana, but never really thought that it would. And it's incredible the way the stars have aligned and the way that this opportunity came about and the fact that I get to continue, my career here in this franchise and with this exciting team. It's just a dream come true.
Where do you think that you've most grown as a coach, coaching at the collegiate level, making deep runs in the postseason with the Connecticut Sun, since your first stint with the Fever and your time as an assistant? Where do you think you've most grown as a coach?
I think first and foremost, just my patience. A little bit more patient, a little bit more of a two-way communicator. I was always a two-way communicator, but a little bit more of a two-way communicator. The further removed I get from as a player, the more I rely heavily on the players that are currently playing to give suggestions, to give thoughts, to give me feedback. And I think the other thing is a better communicator. I'm a better communicator. I'm transparent. I'm clear. I'm concise. I think that all of those things I've evolved in those ways and, surround myself with a great staff, which I love. So I think a lot of those things that you just naturally in a maturation process, plus the hunger and desire to be a better coach and X's and O's and thinking ahead of the game and trying to be forward thinking.
How much of this decision when the Fever post becomes available, how much of your decision to return was the culture that the Fever has established over the years combined with the roster they currently have at play?
Certainly, part of it is to be able to be home. Part of it is to be closer to family. But none of that makes sense if it's not the right job from a basketball standpoint, professional standpoint. So all of that matters. This is a young, exciting roster. Kelly Krauskopf returning to the Fever was also a huge bonus for me. I know how she works. I know how she operates. She's the original architect of this franchise. This franchise is in her DNA as well. So the opportunity to work with her, to continue to rely on my mentor and Lynn Dunn, and to work with generational talents like Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston. I mean, the stars really did just perfectly align.
You mentioned getting Kelly Krauskopf back and Lynn Dunn, of course, a legend in her own right. With a roster that appears to be on the doorstep of contention or appears to be a team that's going to continue to take leaps forward year over year, how important is having that right relationship between coach and GM?
It's really important. I think making sure that we're aligned in our vision for how our team is going to be built, for finding the right pieces that fit the puzzle together, aligned in how we're going to play and the vision for how we want to play. What's important to our franchise outside of just talent, the cultural piece. And I think Kelly has always done a really good job with understanding that it's not always just about having the most talented players. You got to have the pieces that fit together and complement one another. Tough-minded players. Our Fever championship team might have, on paper, not been the one that you would think we're going to win it, but tough-minded, great leadership, competitors, competitive spirit, competitive fire. So being aligned is really important.
You mentioned in the introductory press conference yesterday, Stephanie White is our guest, joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, new head coach of the Indiana Fever. You mentioned how, frustrating it could be when you matched up against Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston. From a film standpoint or from just a coaching standpoint, as talented as those players are, do you feel like having played against them helps give you another perspective for areas to further elevate their game?
Yeah, I think absolutely. When you're game planning against them, when you're trying to make things difficult, when you're thinking about how you can have the edge with players like that, I think it does give you a different perspective. It gives me the ability to communicate with them transparently and like, look, this is how we wanted to attack you. This is how we wanted to defend you. This is what we wanted to put you through to make your life difficult. And so from an efficiency standpoint, this is what we have to now combat against. We have to think ahead of what might be coming our way. So I do think it helps.
I've always been a big vibes guy. I like when atmospheres, when just in general, the way people talk about their profession or talk about, the outlook for goals for them, whether it's, on the field of play or whether it is, in the real world. And the way that Lexi Hall and Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark have, talked about you and been so glowing about it, it feels like initially the chemistry has been there for you guys. Have you felt that immediately with those initial conversations with them and the rest of the roster?
I really have. I really have. I think especially for Aaliyah and Caitlin, I've covered their games, in broadcasting when they were in college. I've been around them a lot. I've seen the way that they work and operate. I've had respect for them, and not just the way they play the game, but the way they've handled themselves, the way they've navigated all the things that they've had to navigate as elite college athletes and now elite pros. I think the most important thing for me is just to be me, to be my authentic self, and to approach them, in the same manner that I would have wanted as a player. But I also think that they understand, the way that my mind works. They've heard me call games. They know how we game planned against them, different things like that. So I think that they understand how my mind works and understand that I'm going to challenge them to continue to grow and be better. But we're going to have a lot of fun along the way. We're going to work our tails off. We're going to compete at the highest level, and we're going to have a lot of fun.
There has been so much rapid expansion growth for the WNBA over the last 3 or 4 years. I know a lot of that has culminated with the Caitlin Clark effect, and fair or not, she being attributed to some stuff that was already in the works, some that she's definitely helped with from exposure standpoint, charter flights getting in place, the expansion or modification rather of the WNBA playoff format. Where do you see the growth of this league continuing, and specifically on the playoff format itself? That irked me. I'll be honest. I've been a casual fan for the last couple of years, and locking back in with Clark and Boston has been a treat. But for the casual fan that's, maybe scratched their head at some of the formatting issues, how much of that is just a league continuing to adapt as it grows rapidly?
I think it's a lot of it, but certainly, we've had multiple playoff formats throughout the course of my 25
Sure.
years in this league. We've gone from the regular 3-game series to, I think in 2016 we went to the 1-game first round, right? And then back to and quite frankly, a lot of it was economics. It was economics when you had the 1-2, the 2-1, because it was before that it was opposite, right? You were on the visitors floor for game 1, and then you were at home for 2 and 3. So a lot of it's economics, and I think with the growth of the league and understanding that from a competitive balance standpoint, we need it to be a little bit more aligned with the NBA, and now the opportunity with charter flights to help economically, with the opportunity to now have this media rights deal. The economics align with the vision of what the playoff format should look like. And certainly we want to have longer series. We would love to have, a 5-game, first round, second round, 7-game final. We'd love to be in exactly in line with the NBA and have 7-game series. So I think that's the long-term goal, the long-term vision. But I think for the casual fans, I would say, it's a lot more to do with the league and getting competitive balance now than it ever has been.
This roster has talent across it, but people will always look to the two stars in Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark. Stephanie White, head coach of the Indiana Fever, is our guest. As that tandem continues to grow, and they are as exciting as any you're going to find in sport, let alone in the W, where is the ceiling for them?
I think those two could go down in history as one of the greatest tandems that our league has ever seen. Certainly there's a lot of room for growth. Keeping them together is going to be a priority. There's no question about that. But when you think about the legacy of guard post tandems, in the NBA and the WNBA, I think by the time they're said and done, that they could go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest.
You mentioned being happy to be back here in Indiana. Can you name me a spot or two, perhaps, that you've been jonesing for, or something about being back home that you're excited to have a part of your routine once again?
Well, I can certainly name a restaurant because every time I come into town, I'm trying to get back to Milktooth, and I haven't made it all the time. So I'm definitely can't wait to get back to there. I think the biggest thing for me is just, I always say it's like coming home, and it really is because of the people. There's all the familiar faces that you see, in the arena, in the field house, in the practice facility, around town, in the stands. A lot of the same season ticket holders that have been there since day one in 2000 when I was a player. I just the community, the family feel, the family atmosphere, the extended family, the relationships that I've built, the people who have grown up with this franchise. I am so excited to just be able to have lunch or coffee or dinner with those folks again and be back home.
Well, Coach, we're glad to have you back. The growth of the sport has been insane. I love being able to now see, and overhear conversations at, local sports bar or wherever, and they're debating different WNBA arguments or playoff seeding and all that. The rapid growth of the sport has been awesome. It's certainly great to have you involved with it and great to have you back home. And I wish you and the Fever all the best this season.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Of course, that is Stephanie White, who's your very own champion with the Purdue Boilermakers and a Miss Indiana basketball in her own right. She joined us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. By the way, a reminder, our opening segment was brought to you by Jiffy Lube. Now through the end of the year, anyone who belongs to a monthly car wash program can save $20 off a signature service oil change and get a free tire rotation from Jiffy Lube. Just point out your car wash sticker, and Jiffy Lube will do the rest. That's big savings from your trusted one-stop shop for all your vehicle maintenance, where you never need an appointment at Jiffy Lube. When we come back, Pacers and Mavs. It was the revenge game that maybe we should have expected for Rick Carlisle, and that label gets overused a bit. But where did the Pacers operate best despite the lack of depth behind Miles Turner? We'll discuss that when we come back. Plus, in about 18 minutes from now, Stephen Holder of ESPN joins on The Fan. within their bigs has been evident the last couple of weeks with apparently, regrettably, I only make slight light of this, but like Achilles injuries being, given out like a buffet lately for Pacers bigs. Isaiah Jackson goes down, James Wiseman goes down, and you figure inevitably the Pacers are going to have to make a move between now and that league's trade deadline, which I would assume is around February. It's generally where it is this year. I've not officially confirmed that, but that's generally where the NBA operates. But for now, they roll with what they have, and I joked about the revenge game factor because it's been quite some time since Rick Carlisle's been with the Mavericks, 3 years plus. But 5-2 is the former Mavs head coach against his old team, and they're able to do it on the back of the type of performance that might become necessary for Miles Turner if the Pacers are going to be unique in the way they fill the voids without Isaiah Jackson and James Wiseman on this roster moving forward. And it's a night that, does not involve Enrique Freeman either. You knew Nesmith was out with the left ankle sprain, but you don't have Freeman, who some have loved for his rebounding prowess and his ability to create opportunities that way. He's not out there. It winds up being a 9-man rotation with significant minutes across the board for pretty much everybody. Jarris Walker, the lone wolf with the lowest total, 14 minutes for him. But Miles Turner, 30 points and 11 rebounds. This is the type of game that why JMV especially, love Miles Turner for what he brings to this team and what he's able to do when he's in a rhythm on a nightly basis like that. He's exceptional from beyond the arc and spacing the floor. And he does so again last night, goes 5 of 8 in that department. Pascal Siakam as well, very efficient. And then Tyrese Halliburton gets the type of game that you grew accustomed to in the in-season tournament push last year and prior to the injury. He has a double-double, 25 points and 12 assists. The three-point shooting with Halliburton continues to perplex me. There's days where he looks lights out. There's other days where you get concerned as to whether or not something wrong, but you win and wind up winning comfortably at the end. You'll live with that. You'll live with him continuing to get more opportunities in that regard. But the one piece that, for me, is going to continue to be critical for them moving forward, and he was again last night, is what Benedict Mathurin is able to bring to the table. Not just from his offensive exceptionalism, but where he's able to continue to show strides defensively, especially if Nesmith is forced to miss extended time. Now, by all accounts, this isn't going to be something that's going to be, prolonged necessarily to the point that you're shorthanded yet again, but for as long as you need a void filled there, you would figure that that is an opportunity for Benedict Mathurin. He is the beneficiary of the starting role, if you will, without Nesmith out there. They go Nembhard, Halliburton, Turner, Siakam, and Mathurin. McConnell as well, though not as efficient as he was consistently towards the end of the season last year, is still a valuable member of that second unit. My biggest argument with Mathurin, if you're going to start him, is I think he works better as a two-guard look for them, or it's kind of that hybrid guard forward look, but in the shooting guard spot if you're looking at a traditional lineup, and letting Tyrese Halliburton distribute and run the offense at will. And then you have a guy like Andrew Nembhard who, as I've highlighted, got shout-outs from his time with Team Canada over the summer as being the type of point guard you would want to play next to in an NBA offense. That from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of the Thunder, his teammate with Team Canada. I feel comfortable with the idea of Nembhard being able to create and operate if you're having him work with that second unit. And we outlined this last week as well for Nembhard, just because he would be in a second unit piece in that role if Nesmith's healthy and Mathurin is replacing him in the starting lineup, does not mean you could not have extended minutes for Mathurin or Turner or whoever with him. You're not just abandoning Nembhard with Toppin, Walker, McConnell, and Ben Shepherd. there are still areas, despite the injuries, for the Pacers to be creative in that realm. But ultimately, if Miles Turner averages 30 a game, which is what you could be asking him given the lack of depth behind him, I mean, he's going to be in MVP conversations, right? That's not something that you're necessarily holding to or expecting Miles Turner produce for you, and nor should you be asking that of him at this stage. But in a night where Dallas makes a couple of runs, where it appears that maybe they're going to be able to overcome and knock off the Pacers, enough plays are made late by this group that has been kind of the standard set for them dating back to the postseason last year, where you kind of expect them to make those plays late because of the personnel that's out there. But depth is going to be something, as the slog of an 82-game season continues, they're going to want to address. And I have full confidence with Kevin Pritchard and Chad Buchanan that they will adapt and address that accordingly. The only way that you wouldn't be looking at that would be if you are confident with either A, smaller lineups, or B, Jarris Walker takes the type of leap forward that you want out of a second-year player. And I'm not ready to go that far. I'm not in the camp that Jake kind of is, where I'm necessarily maybe concerned or anxious is probably too strong, but just wanting to see more from Walker. But it is apparent to me what he is right now. And that type of leap at this stage, I don't know that it arrives this year. But if you get that, then maybe you're looking at this lineup differently than you would have to start the season. Still, for them, this will be an evaluation period on the fly. Maybe more pressing weaknesses or areas of need pop up for the Pacers between now and then that offset the caliber of player you'd be looking for to shore up their depth. Isaiah Jackson has come on strong in the last couple of seasons. There were times where, as the rotation got chopped last year, I felt like he was liability. But more often than not, especially during the regular season where you need guys like him, he came through. And a guy like that, system and fit is always very important, but the prototype of that player isn't something that would necessarily cost you an arm and a leg if you're the Pacers. It's one thing to lose Wiseman when it was a low-risk, high-reward signing that you knew wasn't going to necessarily fully impact that set of the roster. It's another thing when you lose two. And there are going to be moments where you're needing to lean heavily on the depth over this season, with the Pacers wanting to continue to ascend. And I know they don't directly care about this, but if you backed them to hit the over on their win total and make a leap forward in the win department going into the postseason and have a better seed subsequently because of that, where you're going to need assistants, not just minutes eaters, but valuable contributors over the course of the season. On the whole, though, last night, very impressive across the board. They are still figuring things out in the early goings of this season. And it's the same as it was when they had lost 3 straight back on the 25th. I'm not worried about the current direction of the Pacers. If you gave me situations around the league, the Pacers are a spot I would take to be gladly involved in. There's areas to improve on the floor, and there's areas for depth and reinforcement that will undoubtedly occur for them as the season goes on. For now, a breather today, and then back in action tomorrow against Orlando as they continue with the weird quirks of the NBA schedule where it's home, away, home, away, home, home, with that weird back-to-back, effectively a back-to-back against Miami. Still to come, Joe Flacco was the win now mode answer. Is he still that for the Colts? And will they be buyers before the deadline today? ESPN's Stephen Holder takes us through that and looks ahead of their matchup with Buffalo next. piece of the cornerback puzzle away from potential buyers. Adam Schefter reporting this a few moments ago. The New Orleans Saints are sending 4-time Pro Bowler corner Marshawn Lattimore to the Washington Commanders per sources. Ian Rappaport followed it up that it is a premium draft pick, calling the Jaden Daniels window wide open. Stephen Holder joins us now. Stephen, I won't ask for your immediate reaction to that, but I will pivot adjacent to it in this regard, and thank you as always for joining us. With everything that's been said from Colts brass about this being the best opportunity to win, when the moves they made in the offseason, I think, operated somewhat to the contrary. I know they re-signed everybody, but they didn't, make expansive moves outside of the locker room. I've argued that being buyers or doing something today to benefit either short-term or long-term for the franchise is the right move for them. Chris Ballard's track record is what it is. Any chance that changes today?
It would surprise me. I'm not saying they should or should not, but I've just come to expect that that's not their thing. Now, it's definitely not Chris Ballard's thing. I mean, you're having to give up assets to get something that is imperfect usually, because either the player who's traded at the trade deadline either has some contractual issue coming up that you'll have to deal with, or it could be on the downside of their career or something like that. I mean, there's no perfect asset, or at least the ones that are perfect aren't getting traded. So it's usually an imperfect asset, and he's just, very picky when it comes to giving up assets for things like that. So, yeah, I don't expect it. It would be contrary to his belief system. Let's put it that way.
The 3rd round pick is the price for Lattimore. I will ask you in that regard, your thoughts on that, because that, to me, at least from compensation, does not exactly scream music to Chris Ballard's operating ears, if that's what he would have been sending for a player like that.
No, that's a significant pick. I mean, a 3rd rounder should be a starter for your football team for years to come. I mean, ideally, right? They don't all pan out, but if you hit, that 3rd rounder is a starter, a multi-year starter. At least he should be. So that's how you have to look at it. Of course, you could argue that's the wrong view, because draft picks certainly are important assets, and I think they are the most valuable asset. But what you have to also take into account is that half the draft picks don't work out, right? So that's a reality that you have to consider as well. And I think a lot of times, we maybe don't factor that in when we talk about draft picks, because it's impossible to do that, right? You operate under the assumption that they're all going to hit, which is complete fallacy, right?
Yeah.
But it is kind of a hard thing to kind of wrap your head around sometimes. But for Chris Ballard, I can tell you, a 3rd rounder for him, I mean, you might have an equal chance of getting one of his kids in a trade.
You talk about you look at the the house on Zillow that is selling for some reason for $500,000, but it was actually worth $180,000 6 months ago. It's like, what's happening here? That's equivalent for a 3rd round pick for Chris Ballard.
That new kitchen was amazing. I mean, come on. Look at that kitchen. I mean, that dishwasher is unbelievable. Come on. Yeah, I mean, the double sink. I mean, come on.
The updated appliance work that we did here, it was worth every penny to be able to increase the value. So if they were, though, humor me, I looked at cornerback, I looked at tight end, I looked at really any type of playmaking pass catcher, because there's an undercurrent of, is separation an issue for this wide receiver room? All of those are premium positions in the National Football League, admittedly. If they were to go after one, which of those makes the most sense? Or if you'd like to throw another one on the table, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I think the big void for me, and I have not looked at the landscape here. Let me say that in advance.
I haven't either, for what it's worth.
But tight end for me, I think that was a big miscalculation for the Colts. I mean, I get why maybe they didn't think that was a priority, because they felt like they had a good receiving core, and they felt like that would, sort of be that would be enough to kind of carry them from a pass catching perspective. There's some truth to that to a degree. I mean, I could say the opposite. Look at last night with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have like no receivers left, and they almost pulled that off with a bunch of tight ends effectively and running backs. All their receivers are hurt, right? The guys they have left, I don't know if I've ever heard of. So, that's the opposite of what we're talking about. We're talking about doing it exclusively with wide receivers. I mean, they're not even throwing to the tight ends at this point. It really is, I think, glaring. But what has happened since the offseason is a couple things. Number one, A.D. Mitchell has not developed the way they hoped. Okay, I don't say that to discard him. I think he's going through a rookie season that's been challenging. It is what it is.
Can I want you to continue the thought, but because you brought him up first, I've always been of the belief that regardless of system, first-year wide receivers, it's a big ask to ask them to produce right away. By that sentiment, do you think that they are surprised even by that metric that he hasn't produced at a higher rate?
Probably. I thought the guy I saw in training camp, I thought was going to have a bigger impact. That is not to say that he was perfect. I mean, he had a lot of ups and downs in training camp. He would make a big play and then he'd disappear, and then the opposite would happen: make a big play, then disappear. So there was inconsistency for sure in training camp. But because it's not as physical as the regular season for obvious reasons, I don't think we got to see him tested against the physicality of the regular season. And I think that's where some of his issues early in the season, at least, when he was playing more, that's where we saw some of his issues. Now he's not playing as much, so we're not seeing the issues, but he's just not out there, frankly. He's only playing a handful of snaps per game. So he's not really helping you, to be completely honest. I do think, again, they're probably a little surprised by that reality, but that's the reality. And then it's compounded by the fact that Michael Pittman he's struggling. And I don't mean struggling from the perspective of this guy's not any good. He's struggling physically. It's very clear. It is crystal clear. He can only give them so much. I mean, if he doesn't make any physical progress from this injury, I'm kind of wondering, at what point do we say, if you're the Colts, is this worth it?
Well, yeah, I asked Chap this yesterday. I asked Mike Chappell this yesterday, and he was hesitant with it because I think I went liability out of the gate, and that was probably too strong because I do admire when an athlete wants to go through the pain and power through. But at what point is, in that regard, the juice not worth the squeeze? And he's doing more negative than positive by playing through it. Are we there yet?
Well, it's a fine line. I think the reality is they don't have as much depth as they maybe hoped, when you really think about it. Their depth right now is Ashton Dulin, who is capable. I mean, you can put him out there and he will execute, and he will play hard and give you everything he's got. But he is an overachiever. Let's be honest. I mean, Ashton Dulin is. I think it's a great feat that he's managed to remain in the NFL for 6 years and be a guy who contributes. I think that's probably his ceiling, though. To be completely honest, a guy who contributes. He's obviously a very good special teamer. When it's third down and you gotta have it, are you drawing up the play for Ashton Dulin? Most times, probably not, right? You're going to find a way to get it to Josh Downs, maybe Alec Pierce on a deep shot, if that's what you're going for. So that's the problem here. And I think if it were a different situation with maybe different depth, let's say A.D. Mitchell was coming along the way they had hoped, I think it might be a different calculation. At minimum for Michael Pittman, I mean, don't you think he could benefit? Theoretically, I don't know what his injury is. I've tried to get him to be specific. He doesn't want to talk about it. That's fine. But without knowing the details, you still have to wonder if he wouldn't benefit from a week or two off even, Yeah,
I mean, well, if they're a legitimate, in their mind, I guess they think they are, if they're a legitimate playoff team, you're not going to, I already think they won't achieve anything anyway, but let's take that off the board. don't handcuff yourself going into a potential first-round matchup by having a Michael Pittman Jr. that has made himself a non-factor playing through whatever this is.
Yeah, I do think it is a really fine line. And I don't know what side of it they're on right now, but it's a tough calculation. I mean, the player wants to play, so that's always music to the team's ears, obviously. And then they have to balance how much they can get out of him and how much what they'd be losing without him playing. And so far that calculation has been they're better off with him playing than not. Could that change if the results change? I mean, you have to think yes, right? I mean, I don't think anybody's going to think differently of Michael Pittman. I certainly would not. If he decides I gave it all I have, we are, I don't know, make up a record, right? Say we're 5-8 in a few weeks or something, and I've given it all I have, and it's not worth it anymore for me. If he decides to throw in the towel at that point, I mean, am I going to think less of the guy? No, nor will the Colts.
Right.
Because, I mean, if anybody has put it all on the line over the years, it's Michael Pittman. There's no question about it, right? I mean, his reputation is secure from that perspective. So really here, this is just about, I think they're deferring to a veteran player who is willing to do it and put it on the line for the team, and they're kind of deferring to him. Again, if the calculation changes on either side, then we'll see. But for now, that's the calculation, that he can still help them a little. And I think he is helping. His presence helps, but it's getting tougher, it looks like.
Stephen Holder of ESPN.com joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. By the way, updated compensation, this from Tom Pelissero. This house that we've been talking about in metaphor form apparently had a pool as well, with a nice hot tub and, some great views as well, scenic views, you might say, because it's a third, a fourth, a sixth that the Saints are getting back from a previous trade, and the Commanders get Lattimore and a fifth-round pick. So the idea of two picks, fourth I know is borderline, but the idea of two picks that could potentially produce starters and Chris Ballard's name being attached to it, I guess should give Colts fans a somewhat level of reassurance that it likely wasn't going to happen. But in that same level, the Commanders are a fascinating case study. And I'm not saying that this type of 180 would happen, certainly with Jim Irsay, but they have an ownership change, they have a GM change, they have a head coaching change, and now they have the quarterback, and everything's changed about them making that move. So that's just that is the metrics of this league and the business, I understand. But bringing it back to the Colts in that regard, I said yesterday erroneously that it's a one-game sample size for Joe Flacco, what happened against Minnesota, but we've seen him in other stretches during the season. So there is at least a little body of work combined with his entire career to make judgment on him. When you watched on Sunday against the Vikings and when you've kind of looked back on it now, there's been a question of separation by the wideouts and how much they are getting, or rather not getting, for most snaps. Is that a fair evaluator against Anthony Richardson when you say all this about Joe Flacco, but it might not have just been the quarterback? It could have been issues in other areas like wide receiver separation?
I don't think they have necessarily the greatest separators in the NFL. There's no question about that. I mean, Michael Pittman, for example, even when he's healthy, I mean, a lot of his catches are contested catches, right? And why is that? Because, he doesn't run away from people. There's no question about that. I think the guy, just looking at it just with the naked eye, I know there are stats on this. I don't have them in front of me, nor do I know how accurate they are. But the guy who, for me, I think creates the most separation is Josh Downs. Not because Josh Downs is the fastest guy on the team, per se, but I think it's the way he is precise and quick out of his cuts that creates the separation. And that's really how you do it. I mean, you look at, it's the same reason Jerry Rice ran allegedly, a 4.7 or something at the combine, and, is the greatest wide receiver we've ever seen, right? Why is that? Because the guy was just a technician. Reggie Wayne, another example. He could run, certainly, but Reggie Wayne's precision, and there was so little wasted motion in his cuts that he would create separation.
Yeah, I mean, there's guys like Kelsey and Kittle right now where they're so good at reading zone or man that they know where the soft spots and the openings are, and they're going to be able to be open and be there for your quarterback.
Right. So they get that with Josh Downs. So not to get too much off the subject.
Yeah.
So Josh Downs does that. And Michael Pittman, I think, is a good route runner, but I mean, he's just a bigger guy. It's not going to be as pretty, I guess. Right. So there are different types of receivers. And then there's Pierce, who he can create the separation, but generally it's down the field. On his shorter routes, I think there is much less separation generally with him. And that's part of the reason they haven't utilized him fully. I think sometimes I'm guilty of saying they should utilize him with a bigger breadth of routes or greater variety of routes. And he's got to do his part there too, and do a better job of being better with those routes. And so that's, I think, something that's still in the works. It's still a work in progress. So I guess I would agree that there isn't a ton of separation all the time, but I also think that is the reality of the NFL. And that's why throwing with anticipation is so important. That is one area Anthony Richardson really just doesn't have yet. He just doesn't have it. And I think that's typical for a young quarterback. I think you saw some of the throws that C.J. Stroud made last year and continues to make at times, less so this year, but certainly can still make the throws. That is the exception to the rule for young quarterbacks. It just is. The ability to throw with that kind of anticipation, throwing to a spot effectively where the receiver is going to be. That takes, number one, a lot of reps, but also just an innate timing and anticipation. So you can learn it and you can grow into it, but it takes time. So I don't think Anthony Richardson's great at that. And so when you combine that with maybe not the best separation in the world, that's probably not a great combination for a young quarterback.
Do you think the Colts are at all concerned optically if they were to go down this path of, let's say they're out of playoff contention, or the hardships of the schedule are over and now it's a nice cushion to close the final 5 games or so of the season? I think they're at all concerned optically is what it would look like if they give Anthony Richardson the keys back and Flacco's not hurt?
I think particularly if they are, I think one of the scenarios you painted was if they're out of contention.
Yeah.
I think at that point, I mean, aren't you doing him a disservice if you don't go back to him?
Here's my counter. My only counter to that, Stephen, and this is just trying to get into the mind of – I can only get to the mind of a 22-year-old. I can't get to the mind of the 22-year-old professional athlete. Yeah. I wasn't given those gifts, unfortunately. But I'd be – my confidence would be someone in the tank a bit right now for them to give me the keys back when I was told – I'm going to ignore the tap out for this conversation. I know that changed things, perhaps, even though they said it didn't. But I was going to be allowed to fail and not be fearful of failure. And then the toughest stretch of the schedule unfolds. We don't do so well, and I get the keys back. Well, you changed the engine of the car, and you've modified it's now a manual instead of an automatic, and I don't know what I'm working with anymore because you trusted me to do one thing, and now the season's over, but hey, thanks. Like that's the one area I would fight. It's a disservice not to give it back to him because you've coddled him again at that point. You've protected him from adversity that I think could have been beneficial for him.
Yeah, I do think that's a concern for sure. I mean, that would be part of the calculation. It'll be interesting. I think you would have to weigh the messaging versus just the reality of what you would gain by doing it. So let's say they're out. Let's go with the scenario. They're out of contention, or at least pretty far out of playoff contention. If the whole goal, even though I think there's clearly more to it, but the stated goal, the thing that Shane Steichen said publicly, was that Joe Flacco gives us the best chance to win. Well, if that proves to not be true in the end, then you've achieved nothing. So you might as well get something out of this season, which is to develop or continue developing this young quarterback and maybe do yourself a favor and figure out if he's your guy. Because when you sit him on the bench, you're telling me at best what you're saying is we have doubts if he's our guy. Because if he's your guy, even under the worst circumstances, you figure out a way to keep playing him. and you educate him while he's on the field and try to improve while he's actually doing the job. I mean, it was the Colts, by the way, who, when they drafted him, just would shout it from the mountaintops, hey, everybody, be patient. It's going to be rocky.
Yep.
Just bear with us, okay? And then you decided to not be patient. So I'm very confused. So anyway, yeah, I think consistency is part of the messaging problem here. And then there's also just flat out messaging.
Yeah.
Because you said that you're not playing him because Joe Flacco gives you the best chance to win. We know, or at least I know, certainly from conversations I've had, there's a lot more to it than that. And you're trying to kind of get him to learn some things behind the scenes that he needs to do. That's fine, but it's also not what you cited as a reason.
Is any of that tied to the work ethic, or is that just a rumor that caught fire that's just out there?
I don't like the term work ethic because I don't think that's the problem. I think Anthony
appropriate time
put
in. Appropriate time put in. Then let's not go work ethic.
Yeah. No, I'm not checking you for it.
No, I know you're not. I know you're not.
I just being specific.
I'd rather lay a fair playing field. That's fine. I didn't think you were correcting me. No.
Yeah. So the reason I say that is because I think this is less about a willingness and more about a lack of understanding. It's just ignorance. He's a kid, and I know that sounds like an excuse because he is a professional athlete and it's your job to know certain things. But there's some intangible things at quarterback that you just have to know. And I just think Anthony Richardson is just kind of going through the process, not understanding what is expected of him. And so it's your job as an organization to lay that out and say, hey, what you're doing is not good enough. This is what we need. And I have not, it has not been made clear to me that happened. And I think that's very strange. I don't understand why, if in training camp for that matter,
right,
or in week 1 or 2 or 3, if you felt like there were some ways he could be better, well, why didn't that conversation happen, I would ask. And maybe it did, and maybe I'm just getting an incomplete version of the story. I will leave the door open to that. But everything that I've gleaned is that he was very surprised to learn that he was falling short in these areas. Okay, well, that doesn't make sense. Why wasn't it addressed? It should have been addressed probably a long time ago, and maybe we don't get here. I think you put the player on notice. Look, it's not my job. I'm not the head coach. I'm not the general manager. I don't have all the information. But just from a very, very granular or a basic ground floor level, I think you give the player, you set the expectations, give them the information, and then at that point they're on notice and they have to understand whether they fall short of that. I think had that happened, I think Anthony Richardson is certainly willing. I just think Anthony Richardson's a very young quarterback who didn't go through the whole quarterback circuit as a kid, wasn't around, didn't go to Manning camp. He didn't do all that stuff, so I think for him, he probably has an incomplete understanding of the expectations of that job. Maybe he should, but he doesn't. So there was probably a better way to educate him on that, I think.
Last thing before we get you out of here, no elaboration on it. And I guess if you want to walk away, you can. But Ballard doesn't trade. We understand that. He rarely does it. Mm-hmm. What would be more likely to happen? Any other trade transaction or the Colts trade Anthony Richardson before 4 o'clock today?
He's not getting traded today.
Okay, so it'd be.
I would bet. Right. I would bet my house with that very nice kitchen I talked about.
Man, I mean, because that could fetch you a couple nice draft picks with that nice house and kitchen. Okay, all right.
The kitchen's not that nice. We kind of half-assed the renovation. But the point is, here's why. I would tell you the reason I say that so strongly. There is still, as of today, now this doesn't guarantee anything, but there is still today, as of right now, an intention for him to be the quarterback again at some point. They aren't looking at this as a permanent move. That doesn't mean that it will happen. I'm just telling you the mindset here today as we sit here right now. So, yeah, they're not at that point, and I think there's almost zero chance of that happening.
Well, at least there's some clarity there, but right now is the optimum word, as that's what I feel like Shane Steichen's always throwing at the end of questions that you'd like a definitive answer for, but then it gets finished with right now. Stephen, I've appreciated these last 2 weeks. I feel like, our connection as a whole, I know we're not going to Pacer games together, but, has grown a bit the last couple weeks. And thankfully, if you haven't enjoyed it, Jake will be back in full force by the time you talk to us next.
Yeah, well, we got the metaphors going, so we
we did our job.
We definitely got our game.
We got cooking, and we got a lot of home goods section going on for us all across the board. Good on us. Good on us. Have a great one.
Radio. Yeah,
Exactly. Have a great one.
See ya.
That's Stephen Holder of ESPN.com, covers the Colts, and he joined us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. So there you have it. If you're worried about Anthony Richardson maybe being moved, that's as definitive as you're going to find, at least from someone in the know, and I'm kind of in that boat as well. While I don't know that he succeeds again in a Colts uniform, the idea of them jettisoning him seems a bit extreme. When we come back, a big win locally with a coach kind of close to my heart. We'll have that conversation with Paul Cassaro next. Them to the victory. Coach, always good to talk to you after a win. Congrats on getting the first of many.
Thanks, Jimmy. Appreciate you having me on.
Of course. I'd like to start here, Coach, because I know that as important as anything on the court, so much to you, especially in this city, is off the court. And it was annual with the NCAA, Readers Become Leaders Day, a program committed to continued literacy growth amongst elementary students. I'm sure, focused on the game, of course, but the idea of having in your debut game that type of component tied to it had to be pretty special.
I mean, it was awesome. The atmosphere was electric. We had about 4,000 people there. A big part of that, a lot of those schools did it as their field trip day and was, part of the Readers Cheerleaders event. The kids' energy was awesome. It was loud, that was for sure, and it was a lot of fun. And especially for me, my Aunt Gina is actually a principal at Holy Spirit. Her school took part in it, and her kids actually sang the national anthem. So there were some family ties involved in the event as well, and it was just a great all-around day, great way to kick off the college basketball season. And we were actually the first college basketball game of the year, being at 11 a.m., so that was really neat.
Your Aunt Gina, of course, taught my wife Haley back in the day. So she's a big fan of Gina Fleming across the board. But back to the game itself at hand. How important was, especially with you mentioned a big crowd on hand, your first game, getting out to the start you guys did in the 100-44 W?
It was important. We wanted to, from the jump, come out the gates ready to go. And I thought our guys came out with a focus and an energy to them, and they played hard for 40 minutes with no let up at all. And they competed. I thought all 12 guys that got in yesterday gave us something positive, and I was fairly pleased with our performance.
You get 4 Jaguars in double figures. Sean Craig, 16 points, 11 rebounds. Freshman Keenan Gardner winds up having a double-double. As you look around this roster and what it can be, where are the biggest strengths and what is going to be the identity for the Jaguars in year one for you?
But we're going to defend, rebound, and run. If we're going to hang our hat on the defensive end, we're going to rebound, we're going to play hard, and we're going to get out and excel in transition. Try to score in the first 8 seconds of the clock, and then if not, we try to be very efficient and then work the clock. We talk about first 8 seconds, last 8 seconds. That middle third of the shot clock's, I think an inefficient part of the clock. So we try to play fast early and then efficient late, try to spread the ball around. I think we shoot it really well. That's a strength of our team. And I think we have lineup versatility on defense. We are playing without our big right now, our 7-footer. He's going to be out for about another month. Julian Steinfeld, who came with me from the University of Indianapolis. So that poses a challenge for us, but it gives other guys an opportunity. And, I think if we can, get some of these young guys to improve and get better and get some game experience while Julian is out, I think once he gets back, I think that the sky's the limit for this team.
Head coach of the IU Indy Jaguars, Paul Casaro, is our guest. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Coach, one of the, I think underrated aspects about you is getting community involvement and community support behind your programs wherever you've been. We are blessed in this city to have high-level basketball at any corner, of the city and of the state for that matter. I know you guys are on the road at Xavier next, but when you're at home against Goshen and the rest of the schedule moving forward for home matchups featuring the Jaguars, why should fans make it a priority to come out and support the Jags?
Yeah, like I said, we want to be the team of our city, and it's going to be a great environment. We got a lot of local kids on our team, so you're going to support local guys, and even the guys that aren't directly from Indianapolis are coming from a 5-6 hour radius. So it's a team built from our backyard. But also we play the right way. If you want to see a blue-collar brand of basketball and a group of guys that just play hard, play together, and then also quality human beings, that the way our guys carry themselves, they're going to be the type of guys that you want your kids watching and aspiring to be like. What great role models that they're going to set for children. So if you don't have anything to do on a Saturday afternoon in basketball season and, your kids are basketball fans, what a better family atmosphere than to bring your kids to come watch Division I basketball at the Jungle. We're back on campus this year. It's a new era. And like I said, get in at the ground level because this thing's taken off. And I think everyone saw that yesterday, and we're just going to keep building.
How unique was the offseason with it being, a full rebrand for the school? I know it's, already special and unique for you as it's your first stint at the D1 level, but from just that aspect of it and knowing, you mentioned getting in on the ground level, you're literally getting the opportunity to do that with this rebrand. What was that like?
It's different. It's unique for sure. Now, we're very proud of our past,
Sure.
of the Jaguar basketball program and the Metro basketball program, and there's been some very high points of in the IUPUI era, and we don't want to discredit or forget those moments because there's been some awesome moments. But with the rebrand, like it's fresh. The most recent times of the program hadn't been the best, so maybe a fresh start. And the IU brand has been great. President Witten and IU Bloomington has been very supportive of us, so that's been very, very helpful. And as you bring in a new coach and 16 new players, a new name, and the announcement of the new arena and all that kind of stuff, just all this kind of newness has been fresh and a good selling point. And just like I told the guys yesterday, it's the first win for IU Indianapolis. It's not the first one for the Jaguars, but it's the first win for IU Indianapolis. So that was pretty cool.
IU Indy Jaguar head coach Paul Casaro joined us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Winners over IU Columbus 100-44 yesterday. Coach, for as long as I've known you, if you have the level of drive and dedication and never being satisfied, always wanting to push forward and achieve the next thing, continue to grow. Have you allowed yourself at all, though? I mean, I know we're in the season, so you're focused fully on the trail ahead, but have you allowed yourself all, especially when it goes final yesterday, to sit back and appreciate where you've been on this journey to now being at the helm of a D1 program and being able to map this thing out how you've always dreamed of doing?
I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity. And I'll tell you this, Jimmy, I'm focused on the next phase. I'm already on to Xavier, and when Xavier's over, I'm going to be on to Goshen, and when Goshen's over, I'm going to be on to Eastern Michigan. And I honestly, I'm never satisfied, and our team can never be satisfied. And even when we play, we won 100-44 yesterday, but there's a million things that we can improve on in practice tomorrow. We're off today, but as soon as we get off the phone, I'm planning practice to address all the things we need to get better at. And you have to have a get better every day mentality, and that's the way I'm always going to be. But I might not always show it, but I promise you I'm having a heck of a time. I really am having a blast.
I believe that, and I'm really glad to hear that, Coach. Last thing before we get you out of here, if I may pry a bit, what was the just to enjoy the first win? What was the celebratory dinner like last night?
It was good. Me and my wife and my 9-month-old son Greg, the three of us went to St. Elmo and enjoyed a nice dinner together, which it was cool to celebrate just the three of us. And great food, obviously, even better company, and
sure.
It was good to do that together.
I know you're a big fan of the shrimp cocktail. I didn't get a chance to tell you this personally, but I loved the schedule release that you did with the players. The sauce still gets me to this day, but I still love it all the same. Do you have a go-to outside of the cocktail that you go with, or do you like to mix it up at the steakhouse when you're there?
Same order every time, man. You got to go shrimp cocktail. You get the chopped BLT salad. You go the navy bean soup. You save a little bit of the cocktail sauce to put in the navy bean soup to add a little bit more spice to it. New York strip, medium, red skin mashed potatoes, and then the bourbon butter cake.
Have to.
As the dessert. And my wife goes with the cheesecake for dessert, which is great because I usually get a couple bites of that as well.
That's the pro move right there. That's a savvy move from you, Coach. Well, hey, listen, you know how happy I am for you. I'm really happy for the first win, but I know there's more to come, and you're going to continue to stay hungry with the Jaguars, and can't wait to watch the rest of this season, my man. Congrats on the dub.
All right, always great talking to you, man. Thanks.
That is the head coach of IU Indy, Paul Casaro, gets win number 1 at the D1 level as the head coach of the IU Indy Jaguars. They go through that rebrand, and what an opportunity for them moving forward this season. Can't wait to continue to follow along with their journey. Still to come, we're going to have a conversation with Scott Agnes of Fieldhouse Files. Pacers, big winners over the Mavericks yesterday. There's still work to be done in that regard. We'll get all the aspects from both that win and the upcoming games and areas for the Pacers to grow moving forward. But there's still moves happening around the NFL. Will the Colts stay quiet, or will there be some activity We'll discuss that when we return on the other side. It's Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. around the National Football League with trade deadline fast approaching, 4 p.m., when everybody and their mother will have the pencils down GIFs ready to go in their drafts. Have I done that before? Certainly I have. You know me better than that. But the Colts still quiet on that front, and that has been the trend in the Chris Ballard era. The only trade they've done in that regard would be the Nyheim Hines trade when Hines asked out and the Colts obliged. So expectations probably low in that department. One that I will not judge Chris Ballard for is the latest news to come across the dial. That happened during our conversation with IU Indy head coach Paul Cassaro. You can catch that on the podcast center a little bit later, or just search Query and Company or get your podcast conversation as well with Fever head coach Stephanie White. And of course, Stephen Holder of ESPN.com up there as well. But Pittsburgh Steelers active in the trade market. They send a 5th-round pick to the New York Jets for veteran wideout Mike Williams. Jets view him as expendable after the Devontae Adams trade. Look, I've seen enough Mike Williams over the years, whether it is dropped passes or miscommunication on routes or not staying healthy. That's not necessarily a massive upgrade for the Colts wide receiver room as it would stand. So if you're seeing all these trades and you're having PTSD or frustration like, oh, why didn't the Colts get that guy or that guy? Well, I have lines on some of this of where I would rather the Colts stay put and where it's like, well, you know, you could have made a call there. And the biggest pushback, and I said it to start the segment, for the Colts making a move in this win now mode they claim to be in is precedent. They're citing precedent of how Chris Ballard operates, where over his tenure, these types of acquisitions just don't happen. I would say precedent was thrown out the window last week. Precedent is no longer something you can hide behind when you flip the season on its head for whatever that reason might have been, in the form of benching the quarterback you claimed and advised Colts fans to be patient on, because you too were going to be patient with him. And you turn instead to the veteran who you know what you're eventually going to get. Eventually, Joe Flacco, who, again, I respect a ton. I think he's a consummate professional. He's achieved everything there is to achieve in the National Football League. You know where the season ends for him, which is either just good enough to be in the playoff conversation or just good enough to lose in a one-and-done scenario in the playoffs. And if you want to entertain further than that, okay, weird things happen in the NFL, but there's a gap between the Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens, and the rest of the AFC. Even though not so quietly, I've told you, in the same way people feel about the 49ers, like, oh, they're getting Christian McCaffrey back, and look out, don't sleep on San Francisco, make it another run at a Super Bowl. That's how I feel about the Bengals. And I've felt that way since they got off to that abhorrent start. I'm not counting on Cincinnati, but the Colts are not in that class. But they'll hide behind precedent and the value they have of picks and draft capital and cap space and all that wonderful buzzwords for a general manager in years past. They can't do that now. Not when you are mortgaging the future for whatever you think this window that you've opened is. If they're serious about a postseason run, there are enough holes on this roster to be active at the deadline today. I don't need a blockbuster type move, but some of the, like the Mike Williams move, which again, I just said that's not someone that I see benefiting or moving the needle for the Colts necessarily. He either can't stay healthy or is a liability at times. There were a lot of moments in New York this year where I look at Aaron Rodgers and I see Mike Williams in the wrong place at the wrong time. So that's not what I'm mad about. But you see that level of compensation for veterans that are either on expiring contracts or don't fit anymore, where you're sending a 5th-round pick or maybe a 4th, or you're packaging a couple picks together. They said it on the broadcast on Sunday night. It's a mixed bag in their tight end room. They're throwing a bunch of different guys out there and not utilizing a ton of them in a way where you would say that's a tight end number one. I mentioned that in the offseason, how certain ranking sites, Pro Football Focus included, list the top 32 tight ends in the National Football League. And you might say to yourself, oh, okay, well, so there'll be one from each team on that list of 32 because there's 32 teams. You would be incorrect. The Colts didn't qualify on that list. There were other lists where this tight end room did not make up valued grading around the National Football League. So that's an area I would target. I would like additional cornerback help for them where they could find it. Now, the price with Marshawn Lattimore, as the Saints sent him to the Commanders, we talked about with Stephen Holder, Ballard's not making that move. That's one for the cost. A third and a fourth is a little too rich for me. But clearly the Saints were trying to drum up interest, and somebody took the bait and paid it. The Commanders have that luxury because they feel 1,000% confident in their first-year quarterback, and they're ready to go make a push. And while the Colts don't feel confident in their de facto first-year, second-year quarterback, they've declared they have confidence in Joe Flacco right now. You can't hide behind the shield of what you've done in the past when you've reset expectations for this season. Wide receiver would be another angle for me. A type of playmaker you could find that would add depth to a team that Michael Pittman Jr. could go on the IR at any moment. Like, you could have that conversation. I'm not saying it's happening right now, but the rumor's already been there once. We thought a couple weeks ago that he was going to go to IR. And then he plays through this. And Michael Pittman Jr. is as warrior as you'll find in the National Football League, but we're getting dangerously close to a point where he's impacting the flow of the offense more negatively than he is positively. And if you're a team that sees that and is even trying to get him a breather for 4 games on a short stint IR spot, you can't let the receiver cupboard stay bare if you're legitimately in win now mode. Sometimes markets aren't fair. Sometimes you have to pay a premium to go get things. Sometimes nobody wants your business. But those are all excuses and things that help you sleep better at night that the Colts don't have a luxury to have right now because of the self-inflicted situation that they've put themselves in. By benching their budding quarterback, regardless of which way he was butting, be it in a positive or negative manner, for a soon-to-be 40-year-old QB who, on his best day, is not being called by NFL teams right now to add his services. He was not the coveted gem that Aaron Rodgers was a couple of years ago. But he's serviceable. He's the spare tire that Jake has outlined in the past, and he is the best if benched by milk carton that I have outlined in the past. But they all end the same way. Yet the Colts want to live in this world where they are contenders in their mind for a playoff spot, I guess. They haven't publicly clarified that, but playoff spot, Super Bowl, little extra cash on top for guys in the trenches or your veterans. Well, then back the talk up. Don't just make a quarterback change and then all of a sudden say, well, this roster with some holes on it, good players, but some holes on it, is ready to contend because we swapped one quarterback who was struggling to score with another quarterback who put up 6 points against the Vikings on Sunday. Don't just have that as your statement. Go help the quarterback. Go help the team improve and make a move before 4 o'clock today. Now, inevitably, they won't for a number of different reasons, and in part because Chris Ballard will cite precedent and continue the operation that he's ran for the last 7 years. It's all ticking somewhere. If reasonable minds are at play at West 56, it's all headed somewhere. And it's not Shane Steichen that winds up getting the brunt of this blame by the end of it. Unless they save the season and they make legitimate progress. And that continues to outline my main point here. If you are serious about taking strides this year, make a move to improve the roster. Make it be a little bit more believable that you can contend with the big dogs in the AFC. versus whimpering with a first-round exit like you have when you've been fortunate to be there with the same Band-Aid train of veteran QBs that's been rolled out post-Andrew Luck. Or give the keys back to Anthony Richardson and never publicly acknowledge that it was likely a punishment for him for tapping out, and let the season continue to unfold. Or as Stephen Holder outlined, maybe inexplicably, the Colts were not monitoring their quarterback to a point of showing him the difference between good prep and bad prep. At which point, he'll get the keys back anyway. We'll be back to square one of his development, which is where they should have stayed in the first place. But if you're serious about Joe Flacco, if you're serious about what you're selling to the fan base, and you want this to be a win now window, prop it open a bit and go make a move. Do what the Commanders just did. Overpay a bit for a position of need. But if you don't, and you trot Joe Flacco out there, and it goes the way of the Vikings on Sunday, the questions being asked right now are only going to grow. And one would hope, for those in charge of those decisions, Chris Ballard most notable, repercussions would follow. Pacers' big win over the Mavericks last night. Of Fieldhouse Files, covering the action, is Scott Agnes. He joins us next. Pacers 134-127 winners over the Dallas Mavericks last night. They're able to make enough plays late and improve Rick Carlisle's record in games against his former team to 5-2 since he joined up with the Pacers, or rejoined with the Pacers, I should say, back in 2021. An effort with contributions from both, or rather, this three-headed monster that's been the case for them all season, Turner, Siakam, and Halliburton. And the reason you want to build around these three, 23 from Siakam, 30 from Miles, 25 for Tyrese Halliburton. Another solid game from Benedict Mathurin as well, but there's still weaknesses on this roster. We'll get to a lot of that over the conversation with our next guest. He covers the Pacers for Fieldhouse Files, and he joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. It is Scott Agnes. Scott, how are we?
Hello, Jimmy. Doing all right. Lots going on in our sports world, isn't it?
Yeah, new coaching hires, coaching debuts, head-scratching quarterback changes, and injuries stacking up for the Pacers. Yet they still find ways to win. But yes, Scott, you are correct. In the time of year they advertise to you as busy season. It is very much living up to the hype. Always great to talk to you. Let's start with Pacers last night over the Mavericks, a game that has back and forth range. Pacers are able to make enough plays late. Walk me through your initial thoughts to win number 3 on the season for this group.
Yeah, first of all, it starts with something magical about Miles Turner back home. Like, you can always count on that, and last night was just a continuation of what we've seen from Miles back home for the last 10 years. I think you also saw this team benefit from having a couple practice days, having 2 days between games, which seems unusual during this schedule, and obviously every team is off today for the election. I love how they took care of the ball, just 10 turnovers, how they kind of controlled the inside game, and obviously that was a benefit of Derek Lively being out as well as a late scratch. But the interior game, keeping turnovers down, those are my biggest 2 observations, I think.
From Benedict Matherin's standpoint, the conversation against him has been he needs to get better defensively. I have felt like, certainly compared to a year ago, there have been strides made in that department. From what you've seen, are we at a point yet where the growth is significant enough to have conversations about his role?
I think it's one of those in the first month and a half of the season, Jimmy, where you just want to let things play out. I don't think you should force any guys into any position. I think, quite frankly, what we saw was this team trying to use the continuity to their advantage, right? Just like any team. It very much reminds us of the Pacers team from the 2013 conference finals to 2014. They started the season like 33-7, the hottest team until the All-Star break. I think you want to build on that continuity and all of that. Now things get shaken up a little bit with Nesmith out for a little bit, with your 2 backup centers. That's going to force some creativity from the coaching staff. You'd like to see somebody brought in from the front office as well for the rest of the season to provide some help up front. But with Matherin in particular, I do think some is overblown about some of his shortcomings, because all these guys have shortcomings, right? Like, we see even late in game situations, Ty will sometimes be pulled for defensive possessions just because they rather have better offensive players out there. I think there's certain things you can tolerate, and the things that this coaching staff with Ben Matherin do not tolerate are when you're taking plays off and when he's maybe not following through on things that they discussed in morning shoot-around that he's not executing on the court.
Do you find their positioning with the injuries that have stacked up, and you mentioned needing lineup creativity? I think inevitably they'll probably make a move at some point to shore up that depth, but do you think because of injuries stacking up, their hands going to be forced sooner than they'd like to operate, or do you think the next couple of weeks are an evaluation period for all those areas, not just the depth in their big rotation?
No, I think right now you're canvassing the league. That's why you have pro scouts. They're constantly going to other games, no matter what it is, and taking notes on opposing players and getting to know, hey, why is that big and why is that point guard not playing? They may never trade for that said point guard, but they're creating this online database of guys for whether the situation arrives. And so you're considering trades, less so I think free agents, because keep in mind, right, there's a reason said player is available and without a team right now. How much can they really contribute? And the other thing the Pacers uniquely have to consider is their playing style. Like, they really can't have a slow, methodical, a guy that can't run the floor very well. They very much have a specific type of center. And James Wiseman, Isaiah Jackson, Miles fit that bill very well. You'd like someone that can spread the floor, but more than anything, perhaps maybe you're looking for a stopgap, because they have the opportunities here, Jimmy, to get a little bit creative, where you might see, you will see Toppin get some time, Siakam at the 5. Maybe you'll see Walker now move back a little bit to his 4 spot as well, and maybe they'll throw Enrique Freeman. You talk about takeaways from last game, by the way. How about just a 9-man rotation? That's one thing, because the first week or two, right, we saw them go like up to 11 and 12 because of their depth and because of injuries.
Do you think that was just a choice of matchup or just experimentation? Because I brought up earlier in the day the fact that they only go with 9-man rotation last night, and in theory, at least for his rebounding prowess, a little surprised Enrique Freeman's not out there. Is that more matchup, or is that just them stirring the cauldron, trying to experiment and figure out what works?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's availability. And so these 9 that they played are kind of a given. You expect that. And it's actually good to see like Jarris Walker get more time out there, not just 4 or 5 minutes, but 14. Now, Enrique Freeman in particular, why he didn't play, I think he's going to get an opportunity to show what he can do. This team is high on him. But I think it was a situation where Miles had it going, so of course his minutes will be high, and things were just rolling. So I don't think maybe Carlisle felt compelled to make that, but I think you'll see that any game now.
Scott Agnes joins us of Fieldhouse Files. He's with us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Is there a world where they decide that playing small or looking creatively for trade packages and adding depth there or adding more playmakers there is more beneficial than adding a big for the reason you outlined, which is that it takes a certain type of big to survive in this offense?
I think ultimately, no matter how you're trying to play, you need depth at every position, and right now they just don't have it. And for that reason, you're gonna need to add it. Already, say they were at full health right now, Jimmy, right? I think everyone would agree this team was undersized, especially on the wing. And so it didn't help that your 2 tallest players in Isaiah Jackson and James Wiseman are now out, presumably for the season here, with awful Achilles injuries, which are just brutal. And so I think no matter what they do, they have to add something to that backup center spot, a little bit of experience, a little bulk, and ideally they can play your playing style. But you just have to have something back there for the game Miles gets in foul trouble or gets hurt, and you're going to go up against an Embiid or a Jokic, like a big frame. You can cheat a little bit for 5 or 10 minutes. You cannot play a whole game with one center.
Yeah, that's what I talked about today, the rigors of an 82-game season. Like, sure, maybe if these injuries happen during the playoffs, you can adapt with it a little bit better.
Sure.
But when you need breaks over the course of this gauntlet, you're going to need to shore things up in some regard. In that same vein, Scott Agnes with us of Fieldhouse Files. For this rotation, if they're looking to upgrade, and I'm always looking at players that could potentially move. I know JMV gives me a hard time in that regard. I'm not trying to ship off all the Pacers. I'm just constantly fascinated by that element of front office work. What's more likely to be moved for them, or what's more attractive if they're looking for depth or whatever that may be? Players on the roster or draft capital?
I think the first thing is it depends who you're talking to, right? If it's a team that's in the postseason, clearly, and a player away or whatever, it's got to be the player. But you go to a rebuilding team, it's probably the draft picks as you try to reshape a roster. And so it's very much on a team-by-team basis from that standpoint. I know this past year it was players because there wasn't a lot of intrigue or interest in this previous draft, as we saw. So that also plays in, is what year is the draft and what do your player personnel people project that draft of looking like?
Do you get a sense one way or the other if they have a preference? Like, I know we joke about the Colts that like draft picks appear to be untouchable with Chris Ballard. He doesn't like to get rid of those if he doesn't have to. At this stage with Kevin Pritchard and Chad Buchanan, and I know it can change. The league changes on a daily basis, and the deadline's not until February, but is there a lean one or the other if they are coveting more keeping roster as is versus giving away picks?
Yeah, I think any move the Pacers would do right now. Are you talking about outgoing?
Yeah, so like for example, and maybe I'm leaning on this too much, but it's a quote that stuck with me, and I mentioned it again today. I believe that Andrew Nembhard is best suited as the starting point guard on an NBA roster, and that position is occupied by Tyrese Halliburton on this roster. Not to say they don't make it work, but like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the way he talked about him and watching them with Team Canada, like light bulbs. I get it now. Like I could see a team looking at him and say, you know what? We are that type of point guard away. Let's go move him. I'm not saying the Pacers would ever do that, but like that's the situation. You're not going to trade Miles because for a number of different reasons right now anyway, because of the depth and the lack of bigs you have behind him. But maybe that's a luxury of, well, if someone wants to give us needs we have, maybe it's Nembhard or somebody in that regard versus
I hear you.
Let's give a first-round pick in 2026 because we need to fill that void. Like, do they have any ingrained attachments where it's non-negotiable player versus draft pick?
it's a very nuanced conversation. I hear. Here's the biggest thing I think that has to now be kept in mind with the current collection of these players is it would essentially have to be some players involved because they're right up against the luxury
Sure.
tax. Now they have some wiggle room, but for that reason exclusively, the Pacers are not really in a position right now to just trade away a pick just to get a player back. I mean, it better be an impactful player because you're paying a multiple of money because of that penalty that would come with the luxury tax. Right now, about $2.5 million under if the Pacers apply for the disabled player exception for Isaiah Jackson's injury. That'd give them potentially another $2+ million. But any reasonable guy, Jimmy, that you're talking about that can come in and instantly probably help and make an impact, you're probably talking $8 to $20 million per year. So that for that alone, it would be players. Secondly, I think they have those young players, right? Like when you're getting when you're selecting those young players, it's because you're projecting out, hey, we want to be ready in 3 or 4 years. Well, they're talking about wanting to contend for a championship as soon as possible, as soon as right now, as soon as I think more likely next year. And so with that, you could see a consolidation trade. We talk about how, Rick has a tough time, as any coach would. Who do you play here? You have so many guys that are capable of that. Well, maybe you trade a 3-for-1. That way you could take on more salary. Maybe you would include a pick type 2, but that's probably the most realistic thing should the Pacers make a move beyond just bringing in a backup center.
You mentioned Jarris Walker and the opportunity for more minutes afforded to him instead of just, hey, kid, here's 4, good luck, see you later. That's kind of been afforded to him because of the injuries around him. Where do you need to see and where do the Pacers need to see continued growth as he tries to find the consistency that the Pacers want out of him in year 2?
Yeah, so it was just such an adjustment for him in year 1. First of all, because he's so young. Just 1 year of college at University of Houston. He was kind of the fourth option there offensively, wasn't asked to do a ton, but he's a versatile defender, and that's the number one reason they drafted him, his length, his instincts. He did a lot better job in the last year, especially when I saw him play with the Mad Ants in the G League, of gambling less and holding his own. It was a very different concept, as he explained to me, of what was being asked of him in Houston and now what he was asked within this Indiana Pacers system, and that takes time, especially for a young player to adapt to. Offensively, especially as the ball is in his hands more, you want to see him limit those turnovers. That's something you're watching closely. He had one last night. We saw a lot of them in Summer League when he was playing kind of point forward. So you minimize the turnovers offensively. He's really good at passing the ball. And then defensively, sticking to those principles, not getting blown by or beat, and then being in a help side position to slide over because of his athleticism and his length. He can really be an asset on that end of the floor. But to our point as we started here is it doesn't help any young player to get 3-4 minutes. It often will take, especially bigs. I've talked with so many guys about it that add another slot of minutes. So it might take 4 minutes for you to break a sweat and get in some kind of rhythm and then be able to play. And I know I talked with Goga Bitadze about that a lot because when he would play significant minutes, 20 minutes, he would be very productive. But he would talk about, man, if I played less than 10 minutes, I just never felt comfortable out there. And so that's something Jarris is having to work through right now, in addition to, having some predictability within his minutes as well.
Scott Agnes of Fieldhouse Files with us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. I know that he winds up making a all-rookie second team, I believe it was, way back in the 2015-16 season, but Miles Turner at 28 now has had moments through his career where people forget how young he is. Like he plays at such a high level that they forget, he's only in his late 20s and he's been in the league like 10 seasons. This is nuts. And the Pacers have always found a way to be patient with younger players, even though we live in a world where it has to be instant. It has to be success. It has to be right now. Want to label guys with busts and move on and trade them. Do you get that same level of patience with a guy like Jarris Walker, who's still like 21 years old, that they've shown in the past to draft picks, knowing that it doesn't always come instantaneously?
Well, the good thing, too, now is that the G League is a lot more established since Miles was an NBA player,
sure.
Right? But the challenge is, especially for those 3 years where the Pacers we're selecting, those are lottery picks. So, of course, there's more pressure that comes along with that. There's a lot more expectations. And there you're talking about Matherin. You're talking about Walker. And we've seen a little bit more polished players, the guards, by the way, which is not insignificant. That's something Donnie Walsh taught me as well back in the day, is these centers take a little bit longer. First of all, any guy, you kind of really need 3 years to figure out exactly what they have and how they contribute, but maybe add another year for centers. And I wouldn't put, obviously, Jarris in that category, but I think it's important. It's a tough blend right now if you're this coaching staff, right, of them not wanting to just give away minutes for a player if they're not doing what is being emphasized or what they're stressing in practice or all those little things. But at the same time, a lot of how players grow is playing through problems, overcoming their individual diversity and mistakes out there. And I think it is important to play through some mistakes. I think that the Pacers certainly do have a little bit of a leash out there. But they're also in a period right now where they don't want to mess around. They know where they can go based off last season, and they want to get back to at least that is the hope here. But obviously now sidetracked a little bit just because of early injuries in the first couple of weeks.
Where do you stand on the struggles from beyond the arc that occasionally and in some instances more frequently pop up with Tyrese Halliburton? Because on the whole, he's still having a nice season to this point and only like 7 games in, so no real signs for concern there. But there were stretches post-injury where people pointed to, he's only shooting like 25, 27, 29% from beyond the arc. He cleans it up in the postseason, nearly 44% from three-point range. But to this stage, 25% in October and through 2 games, 21% from beyond the arc. Are you noticing anything different from him through the body of work of last season, post-injury to now, or is it just that's life in the NBA and he's going to figure it out? Sometimes the consistency just isn't always there.
I don't necessarily notice any mechanical change or tweak or something that's lagging there. I will say his skills trainer, Drew Hanlon, was down in Dallas the last couple of days. He was at the game last night. And sometimes you call upon that when things aren't feeling right or you just need to feel good again about your game or what you're doing offensively. And I'm sure that's something that they emphasize because you're right. This team is built around Tyrese and built towards his strengths. And so for him to I think the thing that stood out to me in the early going, Jimmy, more than anything was his assists. He had games of 4 and 5 and 2 assists. And I was like, that tells me right away something's just a little bit off. And here I'd be curious to get his thoughts on this, but this offseason was a unique one for him in that, one, their season ran late and he was having an injury. Then he took a month off to try to allow for that hamstring injury to repair, and time off is kind of the only thing that helps with that. Then he jumped right into it to two-a-days, flew all around the world with Team USA, had another injury pop up, and then had a couple weeks back in the U.S., and it was time to go again. And so I'm curious how much of his off-season was about rehab, was about rest and all of that, versus building upon what you did and getting in a groove and maybe adding a few different elements to your game. And I also bring in the preseason. I didn't think this team had a very good preseason all around, and I think that has spilled over into this regular season. But uniquely, the thing that stood out for me with Tyrese is how those assists and the pace was very slow early on for this team, and how it seems like Tyrese is missing everything short. So that's something I think he's working on over the last week.
I try my best to not ask these type of questions when I think are, on the surface, Jim, that's so dumb. What are you doing here? But I need to ask this to you because of what last year's NBA Cup run meant to the community, meant to the fan base, meant to the league of getting that type of level of enthusiasm around there. So admittedly, if it's a stupid question, you just say, Jimmy, hey, that's really dumb, and we'll move on. Is there a world where they look at their lack of depth, especially with their bigs, and the NBA Cup like 10 days away from getting underway and say to themselves, man, we need to shore things up because we'd like to win that thing? Like, is that even remotely on their radar?
I don't think so. I think you're more looking at as a macro perspective.
Okay.
Yes, it matters. Yes, they're taking those seriously, probably more than many other teams out there. But there's no rush to make sure you get the right guy, or you don't pay into the luxury tax, or sometimes being patient. Maybe a guy's frustrated with his role elsewhere, right? And the Pacers could pounce on that in another month or so. But I do think it's important for them to shore it up here in the next couple of weeks just to provide some depth. They have it at every position. And the ironic part in all this, right, is the fact that a couple of years ago, they had far too many centers. They had 6 of them. Ultimately, waiving Daniel Tice and Goga Bitadze, and now they're at the point where they only have one true center. They're very good in the backcourt, maybe have a little bit too much depth there. So from the big picture, it's something you do need to shore up. It's not more of a focus, I think, on the NBA Cup specifically, though.
So what you're not saying is that a Goga and Pacers reunions in the cards. It's not what you're saying there, just to make sure they're not calling the Magic up between now and the Cup.
Yeah, I don't think that's in the cards. No.
Scott Agnes with us at Fieldhouse Files. Last thing before we get you out of here, because you are as connected as anybody and being involved in. If there's an NBA event, you're going to try to get out there, whether it's summer league, whether it's draft lottery process, whether it's the draft itself. Is the league happy with the results they've gotten from the NBA Cup? Because I mean, you and me both, we love all things NBA. Like, I was all about it last year. It was amplified by the Pacers being in it and it being, a new talking point that wasn't there for November and December basketball. Would you, at this point, say that the NBA as a whole are proud of what this is and what it's growing into?
Yeah, I think it was a mixed bag, though, early on, or this past season, really. I think the court's good idea there, but a little too bright and obnoxious.
They took away my pool court, Scott. I'm still mad about that. I liked the Royal. I really liked that. I did. I thought it looked like a swimming pool. Oh yeah. I mean, but I see that's a zag for me, right? Everybody's zigging on those courts, all zag and say, hey man, I loved the color scheme. It brought me back to the 90s when everybody was just throwing out random colors that didn't belong anymore. Like I was all for it, but perhaps I was too much of an agent of chaos. Anyway, I digress. The NBA and the NBA Cup.
That's actually one of my pet peeves with the league is how you don't have white jerseys at home as often.
Right.
And you watch a game and you don't see the actual team colors on the court. But to the bigger picture here, I think they realized, yes, right idea of making courts unique, but let's tone it down. And I totally get that. There was a game, Lakers, I think, at Suns. The court was so obnoxious that I turned the game off. I gave up. I didn't want to watch that. On the other side of it, I don't think they recognized or appreciated maybe how much the money, despite these players being millionaires, how much the prize pool would be a motivating factor to these players. We heard them all talk about it when we were out in Las Vegas for the semifinals and finals. I think that was a huge success. Now, I think the TV ratings were a little bit disappointment. This whole thing seemingly was created more than anything to have a new TV package. And I think Amazon takes it over starting next year. And so there were positives and negatives, but you really need 2 or 3 years to get something new off the ground and running. I would expect for them to even try different championship venues, not just go back to Vegas. I fully expected it to be back this year just because they did it in year one and had figured it out. But I think that will go to a different site as well as they try to find better ways for this to succeed.
He is Scott Agnes of Fieldhouse Files, covers the Pacers as well as the Fever. You can follow him on Twitter at Scott Agnes. Scott, anything you want to plug on the way out the door?
Lately, it's been a lot of Fever coverage with Stephanie White. I had a one-on-one with her. I'll have a story coming from the intros yesterday. And then also Tyler Marsh, former Pacers assistant coach. He's getting a first-time opportunity with the Chicago Sky. So that's been cool to see him get an opportunity there.
Busy times all the way around in November across the state of Indiana. Beautiful time to be involved in the sports landscape. Scott, great to catch up, and we'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jimmy.
Again, you can follow him on Twitter at Scott Agnes. Another spot close to my heart, Butler basketball. My late father went there. Always good to see where things are at Hinkle Fieldhouse. They had their opener last night. Are there questions for the Bulldogs as they try to end their NCAA tournament hiatus and they continue to improve? Color analyst for the Bulldogs Radio Network, Nick Gardner, joins us to discuss. Plus, college football rankings come out tonight. Where will IU settle when all the dust clears? We'll get into that more on the other side here on Query & Company, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. The Bulldogs of Butler start the season with a W last night as they try to end their NCAA tournament drought. Last time being a part of it was in 2018. Nice win for them, 72-65 over Missouri State. Joining us, he is the longtime color analyst of the Butler Bulldogs Radio Network. One of my favorites. It's Nick Gardner. Nice now to take some time with us. Nick, how are you?
I'm doing great, Jimmy. Thanks for having me on. Good to talk to you.
Of course. Man. Great to talk to you as well. Let's go through first last night against Missouri State. Your overall takeaways, your Miltel Fort shining as he's done in the past, but big 29 points leading the load offensively for them. Walk me through the first win of the season and the first game of the season for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I think we're going to be calling that name a lot and Pierre Brooks a lot. Those are the two guys who are going to lead the way for the Dogs this year. Those two wings returning, and they kind of did that again. I thought I give Missouri State credit. They were really physical defensively. I think the one thing that most Butler fans and certainly the coaching staff is looking at is that turnover number. Jimmy, 19 turnovers led to 27 points for the Bears. And that's a number that you just can't play that way. Coach Mata said after the game, Butler cannot play that way. And it was, from what it sounds like, this isn't a team that had been turning it over a ton in practice. So certainly something to work on. But I think all in all, number one, you played without Finley Bizjack, who started at point guard in that first exhibition game. But I think there are some questions there with ball handling, and it's going to be handled by committee. But you saw them work through some of those things last night. Obviously, they found Jamil in that second half. And another thing that he does, Jimmy, is he drew 11 fouls last night. He shot 16 free throws himself personally. But having a guy that can be a foul magnet like that with a team who has good foul shooters, that's an area that can create offense too for this group. So it wasn't a perfect one, but you've got some things to learn, and you're able to do so in a win. And you got a fairly quick turnaround with Austin Peay coming in on Friday.
You'll have to forgive me, but I do recall, seeing and hearing about the injury to Finley Bizjack. But is there clarity on the severity / when they wind up getting him back?
Yeah, I don't think. I think it's they don't think it's very severe. I believe he tweaked his ankle, rolled his ankle in practice earlier this week, and I think it's more of a precautionary thing. He went through warm-ups and everything. He was out there. It wasn't like he was in street clothes, so it was more of a precautionary thing. I don't believe they anticipate him, missing any significant time, and my guess is you probably see him Friday.
Well, the reason I ask is because both locally and nationally, because there were offensive woes and struggles at times, especially at that position a year ago, the conversation is, do the Dogs have a point guard problem? Like, who's going to be their point guard? Where do they solve things? When you look at this roster, and just let's say for the sake of argument, Bizjack is back and fully healthy for the rest of the year. Is that an instant solution, or is that going to be an area at the point guard spot where, as you mentioned, they're throwing bodies at it by committee and they're going to have to figure it out on the fly?
I think it's to be determined.
Okay.
I'll say this, Jimmy. I think there's a reason that Finley Bizjack was the starting point guard in that exhibition game, right? Like, he was the guy who the coaches elected to go with. And so now, is that to say that you can put that in pen and just book it for the rest of the way? I don't think so. I really think, and it's not necessarily specifically because of a point guard, like who's going to be the point guard. I just think the versatility of this group, Jimmy, it's going to be a group that maybe you see 4, 5, 6, 7 different starting lineups, not because of injury, simply because of matchups and style of play and whatever it may be. Just like these guys, look, maybe there's no true only single point guard on the team, but all those guys are combo guards, right? All those guys can kind of play both. You've got a lot of guys who can play the 3 and the 4. You've got a lot of positional versatility, and because of that, I think you may see some different lineups just because of matchups and frankly, how guys are playing.
Nick Gardner of the Butler Bulldogs Radio Network is our guest. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Nick, I'm an Indiana alum, but my family has rich history with Butler. My dad went there. We had season tickets, forever when I was a kid. Like, I love Hinkle Fieldhouse. I want to see, like many, the Bulldogs do well. So you can answer this for me in any way you want. You can put on a Bulldog cap when you say it. You can be objective about it. It doesn't bother me. For this group, where should the level of optimism be about them achieving one of the ultimate goals this season, which is getting back to the NCAA tournament, something they flirted heavily with a year ago?
Yeah. I would say this. I'd be pretty optimistic, Jimmy. I think it's, roster aside, you've got a core group that is hungry, number one. And certainly you lost some pieces in the backcourt and you shuffled some guys around, but I think the continuity is there. There are two, the only team in the league to return their top two leading scorers. Now, I know people add talent, but the continuity aspect is something that I think can really be a bolstering point for this group. You've got a bunch of guys. Patrick McCaffrey is obviously played in an NCAA tournament, but you got a lot of other guys who are hungry and looking to go there and prove themselves there. And so I think number one is the group that's going to work. They've really come together and put a ton of work in the offseason. I think you've seen like you look at Andre Screen, Jimmy, and the change in his body. I think Augusto Cassia is a guy who can be kind of an X factor for this group. Like if he can consistently make shots, which he has the last couple games in a limited, attempts, but if he can make those corner threes or make open threes, man, he is an added wrinkle. And one that I think this team may play a little bit differently than we saw last year because of that positional versatility and whatnot. But I tell you what, I'll tell you, if we can get to February, right, and say, hey, we got a chance each night, and if the Dogs could have taken care of, maybe one or two of those games in February, we may be speaking a different tune. So, my optimism is right there that, hey, you're going to be in position there. Now it's a matter of can you get an extra win here or there in league play that can get you over the hump and on the right side of that bubble.
I tell you something, I was at Hinkle for that win over Providence like the day or two before the Super Bowl, and I'm sitting there thinking, doing the math, and granted that wasn't the prettiest game, but it doesn't have to be. They get a win, it's like, all right, everything's in front of them, and as you mentioned, they're unable to scrape one or two more by to bolster that resume. Speaking of which, as you assess them with the rest of the Big East, that's one of the best conferences in college basketball for a reason. Where's your outlook for them when we get into conference play here in the coming weeks?
Yeah, I think similarly, it's like we know UConn is UConn, right? These are two-time defending national champs. They're up there. They're going to be really good. That's going to be a huge challenge, obviously. Xavier's up there. Creighton's up there. I think the question is, and it's like this almost every year, Jimmy, in the Big East, is like, can you beat, you're going to be in that, say, 4 to 8 range. And oftentimes it's a tiebreaker here or there that separates that. So the question is, like, can you go win a game at Marquette like you did last year, one that maybe people think you're not going to get? Can you go get one at Creighton and bolster things so you jump over kind of the bunch there and separate yourself with what would be a Q1 win or a high-quality win, and then you stack them up. So I think you're going to be right there, and it's like, man, it seems like it always comes down to a game here or there where if you can go get one that you maybe shouldn't have gotten and set yourself up, then you got to hold course the rest of the way. I think the biggest thing for these guys is to stay the course, kind of get those roles defined, and just make sure you're in a position to play in those big games in February in the Big East.
Gosh, Q1, Q2 net. We are so back, baby. We are back. College basketball is here. I'm excited, Nick. I'm looking forward to getting out to Hinkle for a couple games this year. I always enjoy talking with you. Always enjoy listening to you and Mark Minner. And yeah, like you mentioned, back at it against Austin Peay on Saturday.
I appreciate it, Jimmy. It's an exciting time, and get to Hinkle. It's going to be a fun team this year. And this group is hungry, so excited to see it play out too.
Looking forward for it, Nick. Of course, always good to catch up with you. Looking forward to doing it again.
Take care.
That is Nick Gardner of the Butler Bulldogs Radio Network. Bulldogs winners 72-65 over Missouri State. And again, as he mentioned, they'll take on Austin Peay this Saturday, 6:30, still at Hinkle Fieldhouse. When we return, we mentioned all that's going on today on the NFL side with the trade deadline and it ticking away with about an hour and 20 minutes or so before all pencils down. But it's another big day with another prestigious program in the college ranks. I'll tell you what that is when we come back. Plus, plays of the day as we close things out on a Tuesday on Query & Company. You're listening to it on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Today's plays of the day, a good mix for today's plays. Plenty to get into stateside, but before we get into any of that, it's that time to take a trip across the pond. Champions League continues as match day 4 of 8 goes on across the pond. A couple plays for you there. We'll take Manchester City, tie no bet, so they got to win outright, but if they don't, your bet is refunded as they take on Sporting Lisbon, a little bit later today. Another matchup to watch for, Real Madrid versus AC Milan. I'll take the American himself, Christian Pulisic, as an anytime goal scorer in that match against AC Milan. I will also take Kylian Mbappe for Real Madrid as an anytime goal scorer. In the world of NHL, I'll take the New York Islanders to win the money line at home against the Pittsburgh Penguins. In the world of college hoops, I will scoop 6 on FIU as they go on the road to take on Rice. And those are my plays. But Corbin Lingenfelter is in for one Eddie Garrison, the official temp of the company. Corbin, a play for us, perhaps?
I do, Jimmy. I want to take you to the NHL, and I'm taking Winnipeg to win outright over the Utah Hockey Club tonight.
How about that? All right, so Winnipeg outright over the Utah Hockey Club. I will follow along with that as well. I did not anticipate Corbin taking us to center ice, but it's a place that I like to be, so let's do it. It should be a fun one tonight against he will take, once again, he will take Winnipeg over the Utah Hockey Club. I will take Manchester City, tie no bet over Sporting Lisbon. That kicking off at 3 o'clock. Also kicking off 3 o'clock, AC Milan and Real Madrid. Christian Pulisic, anytime goal scorer for AC Milan. Kylian Mbappe, anytime goal scorer for Real Madrid. Islanders outright over the Penguins in the NHL. And FIU on the hardwood, scoop the 6. They're on the road against Rice. We mentioned today is NFL trade deadline day. And as it stands, it appears the Colts are standing pat. But the other element that has historic precedent today is the College Football Playoff Committee releasing their rankings for the first time this season. A lot of the critique that you're going to read online about the Indiana Hoosiers goes back to their schedule. Oh, they haven't played anybody. They have been able to avoid the likes of Oregon or Penn State. Their resume is faulty. There's bigger brand names out there than Indiana. Based on precedent, even in unprecedented times with a 12-team expansion, Indiana has everything in front of them. We've talked to a couple of different experts around the world of college football. Most recently, last week, it was Thor Nystrom, who highlighted the fact that a one-loss Indiana team should be in the playoff, with them being a Power 5 program in a state of college football that has multiple one-loss teams, or in some cases, 2-loss teams mixed in there. Now, that type of cushion or that hopeful optimism for them being a one-loss team is not going to change a darn thing with Kurt Cignetti and company down there. They're covering every game. They're dominating opponents even when they get off to a slow start every now and again, like they did against Michigan State. And for the first time in program history, they're 9-0. For the first time since I can remember, you're going into a game against Michigan in football. And they're not only favored, they're favored by double digits. They're favored by 14 points against the Wolverines at home. And even if you're waiting for this other shoe to drop when they play Ohio State in 2 weeks, okay, maybe they fall to the Buckeyes, but they still have more than proven the run that they're on is not just this fairy tale painting that should be discredited. I'm going to choose to believe the analysis I've heard, which is that a one-loss team in expansion from a Power 5 conference is going to be given the benefit of the doubt. Could all of that change tonight? Certainly. If the committee does some wild stuff, and there's no indication that this would happen, but if the committee does something wild like they leave out Indiana for like an LSU, who some would rank at about like 14 if you're looking at like outside looking in, or a Kansas State, or somebody with one or two losses that wouldn't be in. I'm leaving Notre Dame out of that because most projections have them in there tonight. If they did that, then that sets your precedent for fear of, okay, now you need to overachieve even further than you already have to solidify a playoff spot. I don't think that happens tonight. I think they're comfortably in that 7 to 10 range. They are represented well, and then you see how the rest of the schedule plays out. But I sit here with full confidence today they're going to beat Michigan on Saturday. That's probably the most confident I felt about Indiana football in a matchup of that caliber in my life. But I think they're going to beat Michigan. And then why not go pull off an upset in the horseshoe? Ohio State hasn't looked unbeatable this year. And even if you stumble and fall, it puts to rest the idea of, well, it's all soft schedule and they'll just get rolled in a big-time game. I don't want to say this team is immune from a blowout loss, but I'm buying and have been, Jake has been as well, what Curt Cignetti's selling. That this group just finds ways to win, and I don't need to Google him to know that. You can see it firsthand, even though he was ahead of the game and recommended it to us. And what's at stake as well, like people are talking about, and they said this for Michigan State too, but, oh, they might look past this game. Curtis Rourke and company against Michigan is now a trap game because Ohio State's on the other side. I don't think you have to worry about that with Curt Cignetti. I don't think you need to worry about him overlooking one of the winningest programs in the history of college football, even in a down year for them, with what's at stake. Because what's at stake now, and I'll put my hand up, it's something I mocked at the time. What's legitimately at stake on the table for Indiana football is for Curt Cignetti to have backed up the talk in a way I never dreamed imaginable, which is one of the very first things he mentioned in his very first, or one of his very first conversations to the media as the head coach of IU, was when he got up there with Dave Revson and company on media day ahead of the Big Ten championship game last December and said, we expect to be here next year. And I laughed at it because the idea of Indiana football sniffing the Big Ten title seemed like a pipe dream. But what Curt Cignetti has done for the diehards of IU football, for those that have season tickets, for the Bloomington community, I'm all on board with this thing. And to say that they're going to misstep when they are so close to backing up a statement that, again, nobody saw coming, of them potentially being involved in a Big Ten title game, that means more from a brand equity standpoint than anything else currently in front of them. And it means more from a confidence standpoint as they try to not only make the college football playoff, but make some noise while they're there. There are gettable teams around them depending on who they draw in tonight's bracket, assuming it's a bracket. There's been talks that they might not have the bracket set up. They might just release the rankings. Like, you know how at March first week or late February, they have that moment in college basketball where they just release like the top 16 teams and you're trying to map out what the rest of the bracket would look like. Is it going to look like that tonight? Or is it going to be, no, this is legitimately the college football bracket reveal done for the first time, and they're going to have the pageantry of it week in and week out? Regardless of how that unfolds, this is already far and away a successful season for Indiana football, and it's not something that I see slowing down anytime soon. Hope the rankings are good tonight. Hope it's something they can build off of, and then enjoy every second of this if you're an IU football fan, because a moment you can go into a game like being against Michigan and saying to yourself, yeah, we're favorites and we expect to win. Maybe Curt Cignetti normalizes that, but that's not something you can take for granted in this moment. And I can't wait to see what the rankings reveal tonight. JMV has just walked in.
What were we taking for granted? What?
Don't take for granted the moment IU football's having right now.
Mike
Rankings
Katie's
released
gonna
tonight.
join us tomorrow. The center.
Really?
Yeah,
Nice.
he's a good dude from what they tell me. So he'll be tomorrow. And hey, are we excited about Miles last night?
How about
We're gonna
that,
give
John?
Miles some love.
Yeah,
I don't
absolutely.
hear from anybody when Miles has a 30 and 11. I only hear for other people when he doesn't. So it's weird.
You miss the mentions at all? You miss people not saying, hey,
there's
John,
just
you were
one
right?
bald dude from Perry Township, and I just kind of say, all right, well, he's from Perry Township, so he's probably a knucklehead anyway. But they've been giving me crap.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't hear anything from him last night. I think he's a golf coach or something. I'm assuming they stink. But
Maybe there was practice. Maybe he just lost. Maybe it slipped his mind. Right?
I said,
Lost track of time.
did you coach Dylan Windler? He goes, no, I didn't have. Well, if you coach Dylan Windler, I'll give you a break. But
You expecting
not at
all
all.
quiet on the Western Front with the deadline an hour away?
Winnipeg has.
Yeah.
Chris, I mean, it's
the
Chris
Naeem Hines
Ballard.
trade. That's
It's
about
Chris
it.
Ballard
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
so he's
Yeah.
probably got all his squirrels and nuts and trees from the wintertime, all those selections that he'll cut before the start of the season, like he did this past year. So now Buffalo coming up on Sunday, right? So got flexed out. What else am I missing today too? I know everybody's focused in on the election, but that's not me.
Same.
I'm
We
going
tried
to
to
hoop it up tonight,
yep.
baby, at Center Grove.
Just stay away.
Hoop it up at CG.
Well, enjoy that and enjoy the rest of the
Hey,
show.
good
stuff
job
lined
this
up.
week. Is Jake
Thank
back
you.
tomorrow?
He is
from
back
Ireland?
tomorrow. Yeah.
Oh man.
Thank you, John.
All
I appreciate
the fun
that.
is over now that Jake gets back.
Hey, look, in some ways, he is now the voice of stability around here, which I don't think is something he's comfortable wearing.
He's been, there's no way he hasn't been losing his mind over there with all that's going on around here. Got the FOMO,
Yeah.
was that fear of missing out.
Exactly.
He was absolutely missing out. That's Gina Glaros told me about FOMO. I had no idea until she said that.
It's still around. You're on the up and up now with that.
FOMO.
So, no, I have no doubt he'll have plenty to talk about, as will you here coming up in just a couple minutes. Right with JMV is next. Jake will be back tomorrow. We'll react to college football playoff rankings. And, of course, if the Colts did anything at the deadline, you can join us back with Jake, myself, Jimmy Cook, and Eddie Garrison, noon to 3 tomorrow. Until then, trade deadline is an hour from now. John will take you the rest of the way on the Ride with JMV. Thanks for listening to Query & Company.